At the turn of the 20th century, Europe stood on the edge of one of the greatest military conflicts in history. A conflict that would devastate the continent and claim the lives of more than 15 million people. So this begs the question, what the hell happened? How did Europe come to tear itself apart in one of the bloodiest wars in history? Well, that's what we're about to see in this video. Today, we'll try to get our heads around the First World War. The 19th century was a period of great change in Europe, with most of the continent industrializing and new powers emerging. New powers such as Germany. After defeating France and taking a bit of its territory in the process, the German Empire formed in 1871. And that is where our story begins. The newly formed German Empire wanted to become a great world power, and so was looking to expand its influence around the globe, especially in the colonies where it was lagging behind the French and the British. And to become a great power, you need to have great allies. So Germany started building alliances with other European countries. It first formed a dual alliance with Austria-Hungary, an empire made up of a bunch of different ethnic groups who, funnily enough, all wanted to murder each other. Despite this, the Austro-Hungarians were still looking to add even more ethnic groups into their empire by expanding into the Balkans. And after having some problems with the French in Africa, Italy was also added to the group to form the Triple Alliance. Now let's see what the French have to say about this. In the meantime, after losing so badly to Germany, France was looking to avenge its defeat and to take back its lost territories of Alsace-Lorraine. So the country started working on building its own alliances in Europe. France first found common cause with Russia. Russia saw itself as a natural protector of the Balkans, and so was clashing with the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the region. At the same time, the United Kingdom was worried Germany wanted to take over the continent, and with Germany investing in building its navy, Britain's rule of the world's oceans was greatly threatened. So France, Russia, and the United Kingdom joined forces to form the Triple Entente. And here's the thing. With all these countries swearing to defend each other in case of war, one small, isolated incident in either of these countries could potentially drag the whole continent into war. On the 28th of June 1914, the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, decided to go on a nice little trip to the city of Sarajevo. And that turned out to be a bad idea. Some Serbian nationalists wanted to see the Balkans freed from Austrian rule, managed to get close to his car, and shot him. Now, this left the Austro-Hungarians feeling a bit like, what the hell? Especially since they thought the Serbian government was behind the attack. So, planning on using this as an excuse to invade the country, the Austrians sent an ultimatum with tons of impossible demands to Serbia. And when Serbia inevitably refused the ultimatum, on the 28th of July 1914, Austria-Hungary declared war. Now remember what I just told you about a small, isolated incident involving either of these countries? Well, here's what I meant by that. As Serbia called Russia for help, the alliance system kicked in, with Russia threatening to get involved, Germany pledging its support for Austria-Hungary, and the French and the British promising to back Russia. Europe was on the brink of war. And that is the part where the Schlieffen Plan comes in. Knowing that they would lose a two-front war against both France and Russia, the Germans had long developed a plan to avoid this possibility. The plan involved knocking France out of the war as fast as possible by passing through Belgium, while Russia's size meant it needed time to mobilize. And then, once France had been dealt with, moving all the troops east to defeat Russia. And it was now time to put this plan into practice. In early August 1914, Germany declared war on Russia, Belgium, and France. Immediately, German troops began crossing the border into Luxembourg and Belgium. But quickly, several problems arose. First, the Belgians fought remarkably bravely, slowing down the German advance and forcing the Germans to employ brutal methods to crush the Belgian army. And then, the British showed up. Concerned about defending their French ally and annoyed by Germany's invasion of neutral Belgium, Britain decided to join the war. Still, even with this, by early September, the Allies were in full retreat and the Germans were closing in on Paris. But suddenly, the Germans changed course in an attempt to try to surround the French in the east. And exploiting a gap that had opened between the German armies, the French and the British launched a successful counter-offensive along the Marne River, forcing the Germans to retreat. With this, Germany's goal of a quick victory over France had failed, and both sides were now starting to dig in, building a string of defensive positions that would come to be known as the trenches. And now, Germany's worst fear, a two-front war against both France and Russia, was just about to come true. To the Germans' surprise, Russia had mobilized much faster than anticipated, and its troops were now entering Germany and Austria-Hungary. Now, although the Russians made some initial gains in East Prussia, the Germans were eventually able to stop their advance at the Battle of Tannenberg. In the meantime, Austria-Hungary's invasion of Serbia was becoming a pretty embarrassing affair, with Serbia repelling all of Austria-Hungary's invasion attempts. And as Europe descended into chaos, the rest of the world followed. In Africa, the Allies quickly jumped on Germany's colonies in the region, and hundreds of thousands of Africans started leaving their homelands to come fight in Europe. In Asia, honoring a treaty with Britain, Japan also decided to join the war on the side of the Allies, while Germany's colonies in Oceania were taken over by the British. At the same time, all over the globe, the British and the Germans were fighting for control of the sea, with the British implementing a naval blockade of Germany, and the Germans using submarines to sink ships carrying weapons and food to Britain. This would actually become quite problematic, as some of the ships the Germans sunk were passenger ships, and some of them contained Americans aboard. But we'll come back to that later. Now, after some initial hesitation, the Ottoman Empire decided to join the war on the side of the Central Powers, opening new fronts in the Middle East. To deal with this new threat, the British encouraged Arab rebellions inside the empire, and with the French, landed troops in the region to try to knock the Ottomans out of the war. How did that go? Well, pretty terribly to be honest, and the Allies were forced to leave. In the meantime, Russia was gaining ground in the north, and the Ottomans decided to blame their setbacks on the Armenians, an ethnic minority of the empire, and would proceed to murder 1.5 million of them. In southern Europe, Italy, initially part of the Triple Alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary, eventually decided to join the war on the side of the Allies, convinced by Allied promises to be given parts of Austria-Hungary. And finally, in the Balkans, Austria-Hungary was still getting bullied by tiny Serbia, which is honestly quite hilarious. But that was about to change. In late 1950, Bulgaria decided to join the war on the side of the Central Powers. And by opening a new front in the east, the Central Powers were able to take over Serbia. The Allies tried to intervene by landing troops in Greece, but it was too late, and Serbian forces were forced to retreat into Albania. Now, talking about army movements and putting colors on the map is a pretty fun thing, but it may fail to capture what it was like for the average person to have to live through this war. When war first broke out, most people believed that they were in for a quick conflict. But that wasn't the case, and quickly everyone began to realize that this war was actually going to last. With armies digging in, soldiers from both sides had to put up with awful living conditions, often living in trenches surrounded by mud, rats, and diseases. And every now and then, a good chunk of them would be sent over no man's land to try to take some enemy trench, and tens of thousands of soldiers would often die to gain a few miles. At home, women replaced men in the factories and played a crucial role in producing weapons, ammunitions, and all sorts of stuff necessary for the war effort. And as the war went on, countries started inventing all sorts of weird stuff to try to break the stalemate. So, poison gas started being used, aircrafts began shooting each other in the sky, and the tank was invented. But still, by 1916, the bloodiest and most brutal battles of the war were yet to come. In early 1916, the Germans attempted to crush the French army and to force the French to surrender at the Battle of Verdun. And it was one of these good old World War I slaughters. Wave after wave, the Germans tried to break the French lines, but the French held, and the battle ended in a stalemate. To take pressure off the French, the British launched their own massive offensive with the Battle of the Somme. And once again, despite Britain's best efforts, the Germans held their positions, and the battle ended in a stalemate. In the east, the war was not going well for Russia, and the country attempted to push back the German and Austro-Hungarian armies with a huge offensive. And actually, it was a pretty big Allied victory, with Russia decimating the Austro-Hungarian army. Following this, Romania, seeing Russia killing it, decided to join the war on the side of the Allies. But still, Russia's victory came at a massive cost of lives, and the country was now on the point of breaking. By 1917, more than 1.5 million Russians had been killed in the war, while the Germans were slowly erasing all the gains the Russians had made during the previous year. At home, the country was also suffering from important food shortages, and so it was now time for a good old revolution. A new moderate Republican government came to power in the country, and the Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II, was forced to abdicate. But this new government made the mistake of choosing to continue the war, and another revolution erupted, with the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, taking power in Russia. After this, the Russians almost immediately sued for peace. Russia, one of the most powerful countries in Europe, had just left the war. The Russians officially left the war with the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which saw Russia being forced to make important territorial concessions to the Central Powers. The Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II, as well as his entire family, would end up being shot by the Bolsheviks, and Russia would soon fall into a devastating civil war. Romania, now left on its own on the Eastern Front, would soon negotiate peace with the Central Powers as well. Wow. What a twist. With Russia and Romania out of the picture, Germany can now focus all its attention on the Western Front. And if Germany wanted to win this war, it would have to do so fast, because a massive country was just about to show up. At the start of the war, the Americans really wanted nothing to do with it, viewing it as strictly European business. But as time went by, public opinion in the US started to change. As Germany committed atrocities in Belgium and sank a bunch of ships with Americans aboard, such as the Lusitania, the American public started pushing for interventionism. The final nail in the coffin, however, was the Zimmermann telegram, a secret communication between Germany and Mexico, intercepted by the British, in which the Germans tried to convince the Mexicans to invade America. Oh boy, Uncle Sam was pissed. and on the 6th of April 1917, the United States declared war on Germany. In the meantime, with the troops freshly arrived from the Eastern Front, the Germans tried one last push into France in the spring of 1918. And they were pretty successful at first, getting close to capturing Paris once again. But just like in 1914, the Allies eventually counterattacked and forced the Germans to retreat. But this time, the Allies kept pushing. With American troops arriving in numbers on the continent, the Allies were able to keep attacking the exhausted Germans, and the German army began collapsing. At the same time, as the Allies advanced in Southern Europe and in the Middle East, Germany's allies started dropping out of the war, one by one. Internally, things were also not going well for Germany, as a revolution erupted in the country, forcing the Kaiser Wilhelm II to abdicate the throne. So, with the German army retreating, Germany's allies disappearing, and the country's government falling apart, Germany decided to sue for peace. An armistice was signed on the 11th of November 1918. The Great War was over. The Treaty of Versailles was signed on the 28th of June 1919, 5 years after the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. Germany was held responsible for the war, and as such, harsh terms were imposed on the country. Germany lost roughly 10% of its territory, all its colonies, and was forced to disarm. The country was also expected to pay huge reparations to the victors, with the amounts demanded being so high, no one ever expected Germany to be able to pay them. Several other peace treaties were signed with the other losing countries, and Austria-Hungary, as well as the Ottoman Empire, were dismantled. In the end, the war had claimed the lives of more than 10 million soldiers, as well as the lives of between 5 and 10 million civilians. Add to that around 20 million wounded, and you get a total of around 40 million casualties. This war would leave deep scars for an entire generation of people, and most men who fought in it would not come home the same, left traumatized by what they had seen and had lived through. And yet, for most of these people, the worst was yet to come. By imposing such harsh sanctions on Germany, and with the rise of new ideologies such as communism and fascism, Europe would soon be plunged into another devastating war. But that's a story for another time.